The clock reads 3:33 a.m. In a suburban house in Providence, Rhode Island, a sound breaks the silence that shouldn't exist. A child's voice, clear, steady, ancient, speaking words in a language that died centuries ago. The boy is Thomas Barrett, 7 years old. He has never spoken a single word in his entire life, until tonight. His parents rush into his room to find him standing barefoot on the carpet, eyes wide open but vacant, staring at nothing. His lips move with impossible precision, forming syllables he should not know, reciting text that was buried by the church 1400 years ago. The recording his mother makes on her trembling phone will change everything, because what Thomas says should not exist, and the people who hear it will wish they never had. Before we go deeper into what happened that night, subscribe to this channel and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. You'll want to follow this story to the end. 3 weeks before the incident, Thomas Barrett was exactly what medical records described him as: non-verbal, non-responsive, and neurologically unremarkable. He was born on March 15, 2018, at exactly 3:33 a.m. during a rare lunar eclipse. His mother, Sarah Barrett, a nurse at Rhode Island Hospital, noticed something odd during delivery. The room's temperature dropped so suddenly that her breath became visible. The lights flickered 3 times. And when Thomas emerged, he didn't cry. He simply stared with dark, knowing eyes that seemed far too old for a newborn. The pediatrician dismissed it. Babies are unpredictable. But Sarah never forgot that stare. By age 2, it became clear something was different. Thomas never babbled, never pointed, never made eye contact. Specialists ran every test imaginable. MRIs revealed a perfectly normal brain. Genetic panels came back clean. Autism spectrum assessments were inconclusive. The diagnosis settled on selective mutism with developmental delays, though no therapist could explain why he never even attempted to communicate. But Thomas wasn't disconnected. He was listening, watching, waiting. His father, David Barrett, a high school history teacher, began noticing strange patterns. Thomas would stand at windows during storms, tracking lightning with unsettling focus. He arranged his toys in perfect geometric formations, circles within circles, symbols that looked almost runic. When David once drew a map of medieval Europe for a lesson plan, Thomas walked over and placed his finger directly on Assisi, Italy. He tapped it 3 times, then walked away. David laughed it off. Coincidence. But coincidences were piling up. The family lived in a 1920s colonial home with a strange history. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Chen, had moved out abruptly after living there for 40 years. When Sarah asked why during the closing, Margaret's face went pale. "The boy," she whispered. "I kept seeing a boy in robes standing in the hallway at night, always at 3:33 a.m., always whispering in a language I couldn't understand." Sarah dismissed it as dementia. Old houses make sounds, shadows play tricks. But 3 weeks before Thomas spoke for the first time, things escalated. It started with the smell. A thick, acrid scent of burning parchment would appear suddenly, always in Thomas's room, always at night. David checked for electrical fires. Nothing. Sarah replaced air fresheners. The smell persisted. Then came the cold spots. Specific areas of the house would plunge in temperature without explanation. The thermostat worked fine. But Thomas's bedroom felt like a walk-in freezer between 3 and 4 a.m. every night. Sarah started keeping a journal. She needed to document this for the doctors. On March 1st, she wrote, "Thomas stood facing his closet for 2 hours tonight. Didn't move, didn't blink. When I touched his shoulder, his skin was ice cold." On March 5th, found him drawing with crayons, not pictures, text. Lines and lines of symbols. David thinks it looks like medieval script. Where would he even see that? On March 10th, he hummed tonight. First sound he's ever made. It wasn't a child's melody. It sounded like plainchant, monastic. How does a mute 7-year-old know Gregorian chanting? On March 14th, the night before the awakening, Sarah wrote something that still makes her hands shake when she rereads it. "Thomas looked at me tonight. really looked, and for just a moment, I didn't see my son. I saw someone else, someone much older, someone terrified. March 15th arrived cold and moonless. It was Thomas's 7th birthday. Sarah had baked a small cake. David had wrapped presents Thomas would probably ignore. They sang, he stared blankly, and they went to bed, hoping maybe this year would bring a breakthrough. At 3:32 a.m., Sarah woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. She shook David awake. They both heard it, a child's feet padding across hardwood floors. But these steps had purpose, weight, direction. They moved quietly toward Thomas's room. His door was open. A faint blue light emanated from inside, though no electronics were on. The air smelled of frankincense and old stone. And then they heard it. A voice, Thomas's voice, clear, confident, speaking. Sarah's heart stopped. 7 years of silence shattered in an instant, but the words weren't English. They weren't anything she recognized. The syllables were guttural, rhythmic, formal, ancient. David reached the doorway first. What he saw froze him in place. Thomas stood in the center of his room, arms slightly raised, palms up, eyes open but unseeing. His lips moved with mechanical precision. The language flowed from him like water from a broken dam, fluid, unstoppable, perfect. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands and pressed record. Thomas's voice rose and fell in cadence, like a priest delivering liturgy. The temperature in the room was brutally cold. Their breath came out in clouds. The walls seemed to contract inward, and then Thomas stopped, mid-syllable, his eyes refocused. He looked directly at his parents, truly saw them, and collapsed. David caught him. Thomas was breathing but unconscious. His skin was freezing. Sarah called 911, her voice barely functional. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Thomas's vitals were stable, but his body temperature was dangerously low, 92.3 degrees Fahrenheit, hypothermia. But the house was heated. His blankets were warm. Nothing made sense. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly, warming blankets, IV fluids, neurological assessments. Thomas woke up 2 hours later in a pediatric ER bay, disoriented and silent once more. Every test came back normal. Core temperature stabilized. Brain activity was unremarkable. Dr. Rashida Okafor, the attending pediatric neurologist, reviewed the case with confusion. "It's as if his body underwent severe environmental exposure," she told Sarah and David. "But that's impossible. He was inside, in a climate-controlled home." Sarah's hands trembled as she held her phone. "Doctor," she whispered. "He spoke." Dr. Okafor's pen stopped moving. "I'm sorry. He spoke. For the first time in his life. We have it recorded." David pulled up the video. The three of them huddled around the small screen in the consultation room. They watched Thomas standing rigid, speaking in that strange, ancient tongue. Dr. Okafor's professional composure cracked. What language is that?" "We don't know," David said quietly, "but I'm a history teacher, and if I had to guess—" He paused, throat tight. "That sounds like Latin, ecclesiastical Latin, the kind used in medieval religious texts." Dr. Okafor requested permission to send the recording to a colleague, a linguistics professor at Brown University, who specialized in dead languages. Sarah and David agreed. They needed answers. Within 6 hours they got one, and they wished they hadn't. Teacher Anton Weissman arrived at Rhode Island Hospital with the urgency of a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. He was 73, a towering figure with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, renowned in academic circles for his work translating apocryphal Christian texts. He'd spent 50 years studying language. Nothing should have surprised him anymore. But the recording of Thomas Barrett shattered that assumption. He sat across from Sarah and David in a small, sterile consultation room, his laptop open, the audio file playing on loop. His face had gone through several shades of pale. Now it settled on ash grey. "This is impossible," he whispered, more to himself than to them. "What is?" Sarah pressed, her patience frayed to breaking. Wiseman removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The language is late Latin, specifically the liturgical dialect used between the 4th and 6th centuries. The pronunciation is flawless, phonetically perfect for that period, but that's not what disturbs me. What is? Sarah pressed, her patience frayed to breaking. Wiseman removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The language is late Latin, specifically the liturgical dialect used between the 4th and 6th centuries. The pronunciation is flawless, phonetically perfect for that period. But that's not what disturbs me. He turned the laptop toward them. On screen was a transcription he'd made, line by line, with translations beneath. Your son, Wiseman continued, his voice dropping, recited 13 verses. I've identified the source. They come from a text known as the Evangelium Veritatis Ignis, the Gospel of the Fire of Truth. It was a Gnostic manuscript discovered in fragments in Egypt in 1945. But what your son recited isn't from those fragments. David leaned forward. Then where is it from? That's the problem. These specific verses were referenced in the minutes of the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. They were debated, deemed heretical, and ordered destroyed by Emperor Constantine himself. Every known copy was burned. The text was erased from theological history. Sarah's breath caught. But Thomas recited it, word for word. Not just word for word, Wiseman said, his hands trembling slightly. He recited it in the exact dialect with the exact pronunciation of a 4th century Nicene scholar, as if he'd been there, as if he'd memorized it before it was destroyed. David felt the room tilt. What do the verses say? Wiseman hesitated. Then he read from his translation, his voice barely above a whisper. The soul that returns carries the flames of judgment unfinished, bound by oath to the keepers of the forbidden word. 7 cycles of 7 shall pass before the reckoning. The child born under shadow shall speak what was silenced, and those who buried the truth shall come to reclaim it. For the fire consumes both the righteous and the guilty, and the gate once sealed shall open when the mute tongue speaks. Silence filled the room like a physical presence. What does that mean? Sarah whispered. Wiseman closed his laptop slowly. In Gnostic theology, reincarnation was a contested doctrine. Some early Christian sects believed souls could return to complete, unfinished spiritual work. The Church suppressed these teachings violently. This text suggests, it suggests your son may be connected to someone who had access to this manuscript before it was destroyed, someone who memorized it, someone who died with it still in their mind. David stood abruptly, chair scraping. You're saying my son is, what, reincarnated? I'm saying something is happening that doesn't fit inside our understanding of reality, Wiseman said carefully. And there's more. The verse mentions 7 cycles of 7. If we interpret that as years, that's 49 years. But in medieval numerology, 7 was sacred. 7 times 7 times 7 is 343 years. Some scholars interpreted it as 777 years, a complete prophetic cycle. Sarah's face went white. Thomas was born on March 15, 2018, at 3:33 a.m. Wiseman pulled up a digital archive on his laptop. His fingers moved quickly across the keys. There's a historical record I need to check. Give me a moment. The seconds stretched like hours. Then Wiseman stopped, his face drained of all color. March 15th, 1241. A Franciscan monk named Thomas of Assisi was executed by the Inquisition for possessing forbidden texts. He was accused of transcribing and hiding Gnostic Gospels, including fragments of the Evangelium Veritatis Ignis. He was burned at the stake at dawn. The time of death was recorded as 3:33 a.m. The room went cold. That's exactly 777 years before your son was born, Wiseman whispered. To the day, to the hour, to the minute. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. David gripped the table to steady himself. There's more, Wiseman continued, his voice hollow. Thomas of Assisi maintained his innocence to the end. He claimed he was protecting the texts because they contained truths the Church feared. Before he died, witnesses recorded his final words. The fire cannot kill what is already eternal. I will return when the time is complete, and I will speak what they have silenced." The implications hit like a freight train. "Are you telling us," David said slowly, "that our son is somehow the reincarnation of a medieval monk executed for heresy 777 years ago?" "I'm telling you," Wiseman said, "that something extraordinary and terrifying is happening, and if the pattern holds, if this verse is a prophecy being fulfilled, then we're only at the beginning." Sarah pulled Thomas closer. The boy was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, coloring with crayons, oblivious to the conversation unraveling around him. "What happens next?" she asked, though she feared the answer. Wiseman's expression darkened. "The verse says, 'And those who buried the truth shall come to reclaim it.' If this is real, if Thomas truly is connected to something that was violently suppressed by the church, then there are people, institutions, who will want to know. The Vatican has an entire archive dedicated to suppressed heresies. The Apostolic Penitentiary handles matters of doctrinal secrecy. If word gets out about this, they'll come for him," David finished. Wiseman nodded slowly. "They'll come to understand what he knows, and they won't be gentle about it." Sarah stood, pulling Thomas into her arms. "Then we don't tell anyone. We keep this quiet." But it was already too late. Dr. Okafor had copied the recording to the hospital's encrypted server for documentation, standard procedure. But someone in the IT department, a devout Catholic named Marcus Pereira, heard the file during routine quality checks. He recognized the liturgical cadence, and he did what he thought was right. He sent it to his parish priest, who sent it to the diocesan office, who sent it to the Archdiocese of Boston, who sent it to Rome. Within 48 hours, the recording of Thomas Barrett speaking forbidden Latin had reached the desk of Cardinal Domenico Valente, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the modern successor to the Inquisition. And Cardinal Valente did not believe in coincidences. He immediately dispatched two officials, Father Gabriel Russo, a Jesuit trained in exorcism and psychological evaluation, and Dr. Simone Kessler, a Vatican-approved neuropsychiatrist specializing in religious phenomena. Their orders were clear: assess the child, secure the evidence, and determine whether this was divine, demonic, or fabricated. They arrived in Providence on March 20th, 5 days after Thomas first spoke. Sarah and David didn't know they were coming. They received a polite phone call from the hospital informing them that specialist consultants requested a follow-up evaluation of Thomas. It was framed as routine, optional, but the tone made it clear. Refusal would raise questions. Reluctantly, they agreed. The meeting took place in a private conference room at Brown University's medical campus. Father Russo was tall, gaunt, with sharp eyes that seemed to see through skin. Dr. Kessler was calm, methodical, with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen too much to be shocked. They watched the recording. They listened to Wiseman's analysis. They asked Thomas simple questions, which he ignored. Then Father Russo did something unexpected. He leaned close to Thomas and spoke in flawless ecclesiastical Latin. "Frater Thomas, audis me?" "Brother Thomas, do you hear me?" Thomas's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto Russo's. For the first time since the awakening, he made direct eye contact. And he responded, "Audio te, pater, sed tempus nondum venit." "I hear you, Father, but the time has not yet come." The room exploded into chaos. Sarah screamed. David lunged forward. Dr. Kessler grabbed Thomas's wrist, checking his pulse. It was slow, too slow. 48 beats per minute. Meditative, impossible for a frightened child. Father Russo didn't flinch. He continued in Latin. "Qui es tu? Who are you?" Thomas tilted his head, and when he spoke, his voice sounded layered, his own childish timbre beneath something older, deeper. "Sum qui fui, sum qui ero, sum ignis quod non extinguitur." I am who I was. I am who I will be. I am the fire that cannot be extinguished. Father Russo made the sign of the cross. Dr. Kessler pulled out a syringe. "We need to sedate him. This could be a neurological..." "No," Rousseau said firmly. "This is not medical." He stood, towering over Thomas, and recited a prayer in Latin, an exorcism rite. Thomas laughed, not a child's laugh, something ancient, mirthless. And then he spoke again, this time in English, his voice clear and cold. "You cannot cast out what was invited. You cannot silence what has already been spoken. The gate is open, Father, and they are coming." Then Thomas collapsed. Thomas woke up in a hospital bed 20 minutes later with no memory of speaking. Dr. Kessler ran a full neurological workup. EEG showed normal brain activity, no signs of seizure, no dissociative markers. Physically, Thomas was fine. Psychologically, the world around him was falling apart. Father Rousseau and Dr. Kessler left the room for a private consultation. Sarah and David were kept waiting, guarded by a hospital security officer who suddenly seemed less like protection and more like containment. When the door finally opened, Rousseau's expression was grim. "We need to take Thomas to Rome," he said flatly. "Absolutely not," Sarah snapped. "Mrs. Barrett, your son is exhibiting signs consistent with either extreme psychogenic phenomenon or something far more troubling. The Vatican has resources, experts in theology, medicine, and spiritual discernment. We can help him, or you'll lock him away," David said coldly. "Study him like a lab rat." Dr. Kessler stepped forward, her tone measured. "Mr. Barrett, your son spoke fluent ecclesiastical Latin, a dead dialect he's never been exposed to. He responded to liturgical prompts with theological precision. Either he's channeling knowledge from an external source, or his brain is accessing information that shouldn't exist in his neural pathways. Either way, he needs specialized care." "He needs his parents," Sarah said, voice breaking. Rousseau softened slightly. "We're not asking to separate you. Come with him. Stay in Rome. But we need to understand what's happening before it escalates." "Escalates how?" David demanded. Rousseau exchanged a glance with Kessler. "Because this isn't the first case." Silence. "What do you mean?" Sarah whispered. Rousseau sat down heavily. In 1987, a 9-year-old girl in Prague began speaking Aramaic and reciting passages from the Gospel of Judas, a text discovered only 2 years prior and not yet published. She had no access to it. She described events from the life of Judas Iscariot with details that matched suppressed church records. She died 3 months later from sudden cardiac arrest. He continued. In 2003, a 12-year-old boy in Manila started writing in Coptic, transcribing fragments of the Gospel of Thomas. He claimed to be a scribe named Didymus, who was martyred in 72 AD. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Within 6 weeks, his organs began shutting down. He died, whispering, "It is finished." Sarah's hands trembled. "You're saying Thomas is going to die?" "I'm saying these cases follow a pattern," Rousseau said. "A child manifests knowledge from suppressed Christian texts. They claim connection to historical figures. Their physical health deteriorates rapidly. And they all say the same thing before the end. They are coming." David's blood ran cold. "Thomas said that. Today. They are coming." Rousseau nodded gravely. "Which is why time is critical. Whatever is happening to your son, it's following a script. And if history is any indication, we have weeks, maybe days, before something catastrophic happens." "What kind of catastrophic?" Sarah demanded. Dr. Kessler pulled out a tablet and showed them a photograph. It was a medieval painting from the 13th century depicting the execution of a monk. The monk's face was illuminated, serene, as flames consumed him. Behind him, shadowy figures with burning eyes watched from the darkness. "This is the only known depiction of Thomas of Assisi's execution," Kessler explained. "It was painted 50 years after his death by an anonymous artist. Notice the figures in the background. Medieval scholars believed they represented demons. But some modern researchers think they symbolize something else. Agents of the church tasked with erasing heretical knowledge. Enforcers. You think the church is going to hurt my son?" Sarah's voice rose. "No," Rousseau said firmly. "But I think there are forces, spiritual or otherwise, that don't want this knowledge resurfacing. and they've killed to keep it buried before. David stood, fists clenched. So what do? We go to Rome, Rousseau said. We access the Vatican secret archives. We find out exactly what Thomas of Assisi was protecting, and we figure out why it's coming back now. Sarah looked at Thomas, still unconscious, hooked to monitors. And if we refuse? Rousseau's gaze was steady. Then you're on your own, and whatever is coming will find you anyway. 48 hours later, Vatican City. The flight to Rome was surreal. Thomas slept most of the way, eerily peaceful. Sarah and David sat rigid, sandwiched between Rousseau and Kessler, who spoke in low tones about protocols and contingencies. When they landed at Leonardo da Vinci Airport, a black Mercedes was waiting. No logos, no identification. They drove through Rome's ancient streets in silence, past the Colosseum, past the Tiber, until the dome of St. Peter's Basilica rose before them like a monument to God's authority on earth. They entered Vatican City through a side gate, bypassing tourists entirely. The car descended into an underground parking structure that seemed to stretch for miles. They were led through a series of corridors, stone walls, flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper and incense. Finally, they arrived at a reinforced steel door. Rousseau scanned his keycard. The door hissed open, revealing an elevator that descended far deeper than seemed possible. "Where are we going?" David asked. "The Apostolic Archive," Rousseau said. "The real one." The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a vast underground library, rows upon rows of ancient manuscripts, climate-controlled glass cases, vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadow. It looked like something from a fantasy film, but it was real. Waiting for them was Cardinal Domenico Valente, an imposing man in his 70s, with silver hair and eyes like steel. "Mr. and Mrs. Barrett," he said in perfect English. "Welcome. I wish it were under better circumstances." "Where's our son?" Sarah demanded. "Thomas is being examined by our medical team," Valente said calmly. "He's safe, you have my word, but we need to talk." He led them to a private study lined with leather-bound books. On the central table was a single ancient manuscript, protected under glass. "This," Valente said, "is one of 3 surviving fragments of the Evangelium Veritatis Ignis. It was recovered from a hidden chamber beneath the Basilica of San Francesco in Assisi in 1873. It's never been made public. The text is problematic." David stared at the faded parchment. "Why?" "Because it claims that certain souls are bound by divine contract to return when truth is in danger. It describes a cycle, 777 years, during which the soul exists in limbo, holding knowledge too dangerous to be forgotten. When the cycle completes, the soul reincarnates to deliver its testimony." Sarah's voice was hollow. "Thomas." "Possibly," Valente said, "but there's more. The manuscript lists 7 keepers, individuals across history who were tasked with protecting this knowledge. Thomas of Assisi was the 3rd. If your son truly is his reincarnation, then he's part of a lineage that spans millennia." "What knowledge?" David pressed. Valente hesitated. Then he opened a locked drawer and pulled out a leather journal. This belonged to Thomas of Assisi. It was found hidden in the wall of his cell after his execution. He wrote it in code. It took us centuries to decipher. What he recorded changes everything we understand about early Christianity. He opened the journal to a marked page. The text was in Latin, but an English translation was clipped alongside it. David read aloud, voice shaking. "The council lied. The texts they burned did not deny Christ. They revealed him fully. They spoke of the soul's eternal journey, of reincarnation as divine mercy, of judgment not as damnation, but as refinement. They could not allow this. For if humanity knew that salvation was a process, not a single moment, the church's power would crumble. So they burned the truth, and they burned us with it." Silence. "This is heresy," Sarah whispered. "To the church of the 4th century, yes," Valente said. "But what if it's true? What if the early Christians believed in reincarnation and the church suppressed it to consolidate authority?" David's mind reeled. Why are you showing us this? You're a cardinal. This undermines everything the church stands for. Valente's expression hardened, because 7 children over the past century have manifested this knowledge, and all of them died. I won't let Thomas be the 8th. If he truly carries the memory of Thomas of Assisi, then he's trying to complete what was left unfinished, and we need to help him before whoever killed the others finds him. Whoever? Sarah's blood went cold. You think someone is hunting these children? Valente nodded slowly. There's a faction within the church, radical traditionalists who believe any resurgence of suppressed doctrine is demonic. They operate in secret. They've existed since the Inquisition, and they've made it their mission to erase any evidence of reincarnation theology permanently. He pulled out another file. Photographs spilled across the table, crime scenes, children's bodies, medical reports stamped with Vatican seals. These children didn't die of natural causes, Valente said quietly. They were silenced, and if this faction learns about Thomas, they'll come for him too. David grabbed Sarah's hand. Then we leave. Now, we disappear. You can't hide from them, Rousseau interjected. They have resources you can't imagine. Your only chance is to finish what Thomas of Assisi started. Reveal the truth. Publicly. Make it impossible to bury again. And how do we do that? Sarah demanded. Valente pointed to the manuscript. Thomas of Assisi hid 7 copies of the Evangelium Veritatis Ignis across Europe. Only he knew where. If your son truly has his memories, he can find them, and once we have all 7, we release them to the world. Scholars, media, everyone. The truth becomes undeniable. David shook his head. You're asking a 7-year-old child to lead a treasure hunt for forbidden gospels while being hunted by religious extremists. That's insane. It's the only way he survives, Valente said. Because if we do nothing, they'll kill him to keep him silent, just like they killed the others. Sarah looked at Thomas through the glass window of the examination room. He was awake now, drawing on paper with crayons. But he wasn't drawing pictures. He was drawing maps, detailed, precise maps of medieval Europe, with 7 red X's marked across them. The realization hit like an avalanche. Thomas wasn't just speaking Latin or reciting verses. He was remembering lifetimes, places, secrets buried for centuries. Dr. Kessler entered the study holding the drawings. Her hands trembled slightly. He's been drawing non-stop for the past hour. These aren't random. They're cartographically accurate representations of 13th century Europe. And these marks, she pointed to the 7 red X's, they correspond to Franciscan monasteries, founded between 1220 and 1240. All of them were destroyed during the Inquisition. Valente studied the maps closely, comparing them to historical records on his tablet. San Damiano in Assisi, destroyed 1244. Portiuncula Chapel, also Assisi, burned 1253. The Franciscan house in Toulouse, razed 1243. Monastery of Montségur in southern France, obliterated 1244 during the Cathar Purge. He continued down the list, his voice growing heavier. Santiago de Compostela Annex, Prague Holy Trinity, and finally, the convent of St. Clare in Bologna. Every single one was systematically destroyed within a decade of Thomas of Assisi's execution, and every destruction was ordered by the same inquisitorial authority, Cardinal Goffredo di Sant'Angelo. He was hunting the manuscripts, Rousseau said quietly. Thomas hid them, and Sant'Angelo spent years tracking them down. But he didn't find them all, Valente said, his eyes gleaming. If he had, these locations wouldn't matter. The fact that Thomas is showing us these places means the manuscripts are still there, hidden, waiting. Sarah felt ice in her veins. You want us to go to these places? With Thomas? Not all of them, Valente said. But we start with the closest, Assisi. It's where Thomas of Assisi lived, worked, and was executed. If any manuscript survived, it's there. And if this faction you mentioned finds out we're looking, David challenged. Valente's jaw tightened. Then we move quickly, and we pray. 72 hours later, Assisi, Italy. The hill town of Assisi rose from the Umbrian landscape like a medieval dream. Stone buildings, terracotta roofs, ancient basilicas glowing golden in the late afternoon sun. Tourists wandered cobblestone streets, oblivious to the fact that beneath their feet, history was about to crack open. Sarah, David, and Thomas traveled with a small team. Father Russo, Dr. Kessler, Cardinal Valente, and 2 Swiss guards in plain clothes. They moved quietly, checking into a small hotel near the Basilica of San Francesco under false names. That night, Valente gathered them in a secure room. On the table was a 3D printed model of the basilica's subterranean levels, based on ground-penetrating radar scans conducted secretly by Vatican archaeologists. The basilica has multiple layers, Valente explained, pointing to the model. The upper church, the lower church, and beneath that, the crypt where St. Francis is buried. But there's a 4th level, a series of tunnels and chambers that predate the basilica. They were used by Franciscan monks for private worship, and, we believe, for hiding contraband texts. How do we get down there? David asked. There's a service entrance in the lower church, used by restoration crews. We've arranged access for tomorrow night after closing. We'll have 3 hours before the morning staff arrives. Thomas sat quietly in the corner, staring at the model. Then he stood, walked over, and placed his small finger on a specific section of the underground tunnels. He spoke in Italian, a language he'd never learned. Qui, sotto la terza colonna, dietro il muro falso. Here, under the 3rd column, behind the false wall. Everyone froze. Russo knelt beside him. Thomas, how do you know that? Thomas looked at him with those ancient eyes. Because I put it there. The next night, Basilica of San Francesco, lower church. The basilica was silent, vast and heavy with centuries of prayer. Frescoes by Giotto stared down from the walls, saints and angels watching as the small group descended a narrow stone staircase, flashlights cutting through darkness. The air grew colder with each step. The smell of damp stone and old incense intensified. They reached the crypt level, where St. Francis's tomb lay behind iron gates, but they didn't stop there. Russo led them to a small wooden door, nearly invisible against the stone wall. He unlocked it with a key provided by the Vatican archives. The door groaned open, revealing a steep, spiraling staircase descending into blackness. This is it, Valente whispered. The 4th level. They descended single file. Thomas moved without hesitation, as if he'd walked this path 1,000 times. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a vaulted chamber, rough stone walls, collapsed wooden beams, centuries of dust. Thomas walked directly to the 3rd column from the left. He knelt and pressed his palm against the base. Here, he said softly. Russo and one of the Swiss guards examined the column. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then Russo noticed faint chisel marks, deliberate, almost invisible. He pushed against a specific stone, and it shifted inward with a grinding sound. A section of the wall swung open like a door. Behind it was a small alcove, no bigger than a coffin. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, was a leather-bound manuscript. Valente's hands trembled as he reached for it. He carefully lifted it, feeling the weight of history in his palms. He set it on a portable table and, with surgical precision, cut the wax seal and unfolded the cloth. The manuscript was in remarkable condition. The vellum pages were yellowed but intact. The script was Latin, written in a tight, controlled hand. Valente opened to the first page and read aloud, Evangelium Veritatis Ignis, Transcriptum Permanum, Thomas de Assisi, Anno Domini, 1240. Quod sequitur, est veritas quam ecclesia timet. The Gospel of the Fire of Truth, transcribed by the hand of Thomas of Assisi in the year of our Lord, 1240. What follows is the truth the Church fears. Silence hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Kessler photographed each page with a high-resolution camera. Russo crossed himself repeatedly, murmuring prayers. Valente simply stared, his lifetime of faith and doctrine colliding with undeniable evidence. Then Thomas spoke, his voice layered again with that ancient presence. This is one of 7. The others must be found, or they will come, and they will erase it all again. As if summoned by his words, a sound echoed from the tunnel above. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving quickly. Rousseau's face went pale. We need to leave. Now. The Swiss guards drew concealed firearms. Valente sealed the manuscript back into its protective wrapping. They moved toward the staircase, but the footsteps were descending rapidly. "Trap!" one of the guards hissed. "They knew we were coming." Rousseau grabbed Thomas. "There's another way out. The monks used it during raids. Follow me." He led them deeper into the chamber, to a collapsed wall section. Behind it was a narrow passageway, barely wide enough for an adult. They squeezed through, flashlights dancing wildly. The passage twisted and descended, ancient stone giving way to packed earth. They were moving beneath the hillside itself, following a tunnel that hadn't been used in centuries. Behind them, voices shouted in Italian, orders, threats. Then a gunshot cracked through the stone, deafeningly loud in the confined space. "Run!" Valente shouted. They sprinted through the darkness, Thomas clutched tightly in Sarah's arms. The tunnel forked. Rousseau chose left without hesitation. The air grew fresher. Ahead, a faint square of moonlight appeared. An exit. They burst out into the night on the outskirts of Assisi, collapsing onto grass and dirt. Behind them, the tunnel entrance was concealed by overgrown vines. The voices faded. They were alive, barely. Valente clutched the manuscript to his chest, breathing hard. "We need to get this to safety. Rome, the archives." "No," Thomas said suddenly, his voice clear and commanding. "Rome isn't safe. They're everywhere. We go to the second location, Toulouse. The answers are there." "Thomas, you're a child," Sarah said desperately. "You can't—" "I'm not a child," Thomas interrupted, and for a moment his eyes blazed with something far older than 7 years. "I am Thomas of Assisi. I am Brother Marcus of Antioch. I am Didymus the scribe. I am the keeper of the flame that cannot die, and I will finish what I started." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "I just want my son back." Thomas's expression softened. He reached up and touched her cheek. "I am your son, but I am also more. And if we stop now, I will die. They will kill me, just like they killed the others. The only way forward is to find all 7 manuscripts, to speak the truth so loudly they cannot silence it again." David pulled them both close. "Then we finish this, together." Valente nodded slowly. "Toulouse. We leave at dawn." But as they made their way down the hillside toward a waiting vehicle, none of them saw the figure watching from the shadows, a man in black clerical garb, speaking into a phone in rapid Latin. Cardinal Goffredo di Sant'Angelo had been dead for 777 years, but his order had not, and they were just getting started. In a monastery deep beneath Vatican City, in a room that appeared on no official map, 12 men in scarlet robes sat around a circular table. In the center burned a single candle. The flame of orthodoxy, they called it. It had burned continuously since 325 AD. The leader, known only as the custodian, spoke in Latin. "The boy has found the first manuscript. As predicted, the cycle is completing itself." Another voice, younger, angry. "Then we eliminate him, like we did the others." "No," the custodian said calmly. "This one is different. He has protection, he has the cardinal, and he has awakened fully. If we kill him now, we risk martyrdom, we risk exposure. Then what do we do?" The custodian smiled, a cold, terrible expression. "We let him find the manuscripts, all 7. And when he has gathered them, when he believes he has won, we take them all at once. And we burn them, and we burn him. And this time there will be no return. The cycle ends, forever." The candle flickered, and somewhere in Assisi, Thomas Barrett woke from a dream, screaming a single word, "Fire!"